let me start out by saying that fundamentally, if we're talking about two general topics that were given to us, both the question of democracy and the slippage from democracy, I think that we have to address there about three major issues of why this is happening. One is the efforts to polarize and exclude the other. In many of the rich countries, migrants are being excluded systematically, but fundamentally, it is the fact that inclusion is very important if we're going to have a fundamentally functional democratic process. Secondly, the level of participation. There is much disenchantment with existing political parties about government and politicians generally and demand for change. So a charismatic populist who drives wedge issues can find a good response fairly easily. And there's also attractiveness for outsiders and those promising change. And related to that, of course, are the capabilities for people to participate. Amartya Sen has shown that many people, extremely poor people, unhealthy people, etc., have difficulty in exercising those rights that are guaranteed for them, but that they cannot really exercise them. And finally, the fact that we know we're living in a decision-making by an informed electorate is becoming more and more difficult, partly because of social media and conspiracy theories, partly because of deep fakes, partly because of general disenchantment and the absence of trusted sources to get the knowledge that the electorate should vote on. So how do we cope with that? I think that the experience of those countries that have been able to step back from the orientation towards authoritarianism shows that we need to identify corruption, because that's usually accompanying this concentration of wealth and power, and also select which issues to focus on. It can't be simply across the board. It has to be something which has promises and deliveries that are possible. So this good selection of issues becomes important. And turning around the wedge issues, which the populists use, they identify the wedge issue and then keep driving it, but they don't really have a solution for it. So if there is a wedge issue, we should have to find good answers for it and present it. And that requires two major things: the media for transparency and ultimate accountability, and civic action at the grassroots, including such institutions as unions, universities, academia, etc. That's very briefly what I have to say about democracy. Of course, we can speak a lot more about that. But then if you look at multilateralism, well, I fear that we are returning to the 19th century vision of spheres of influence, where hegemons in particular parts of the world dictate what they want to dictate to the rest of the world and to themselves. President Lula recently responded to President Trump's interventions in Brazilian affairs by saying, while wearing a hat that says Brazil for Brazilians, as opposed to the MAGA hat, he said, Mr. Trump has been elected president of the United States, but he has not been elected emperor of the world. And he's behaving as if he had a mandate to be emperor of the world and do whatever he wants. And I think, but Brazil is not, it's just a small country that can be pushed around, but we have seen this kind of action going on. But more important is the fact that this idea of return to spheres of influence, we have seen the Ukraine war and the dismissal by the major powers, specifically Russia and the United States, of by using their veto of the collective views of the international community as expressed by massive votes in the General Assembly. And also, if I may say, a normalization of violence and misery, and also, until quite recently, the double standards of the West, including such things as how they reacted to what's happening in Gaza and other places. And then finally, that the Ukraine war has also pushed the Europeans to reconsider the issues of open trade and involving that we would have peaceful relations, to suddenly start looking at energy from a national security perspective, which therefore also brings a different dimension, but also emphasizes the pursuit of national interests as opposed to simply trade issues. And then finally, there are the hidden tragedies, everything from Sudan to all the other places where millions of people are being displaced and many are being killed, and where in fact the news media doesn't even cover them, and except for the people of humanitarian aid and the UN agencies don't do that. So The challenge to that will be that if we have a proper resurgence of democratic processes, I believe we will also probably have a better audience to discuss multilateralism than when it is being pursued by rulers who are authoritarian and nationally oriented, as we are witnessing in a number of countries. So with that, what sort of views and answers would any of you like to bring? And I hope we can do it within 5 minutes. Let me turn now to John Miller. First, John, all yours.
Yes, thank you. Good day. And I almost think you've said it all. But first, my background includes a long time in the media industry and related nonprofit activities in education, information, disinformation. So I tend to look at things with that lens, and we'll make some comments like that today. But most of all, I really try to understand where are actual people. And try to do that on a global basis is not easy. There's not a lot of cogent information, but there is some. And I would say the thing we need to be very cognizant of is that we need, on a global basis, we need new narratives. We need narratives that support democracy, that support multinationalism, multilateralism, and we need proof points around that, as you just mentioned. But rather than make this abstract, I'll just give you some data points, because the most cogent, to me, surveys is the Edelman survey. It's done every year for 28 years. It looks at 25 years, 28 countries, over 30,000 respondents. And it's pretty sobering because, again, as we say in the measurement business, it's absolutely wrong, but it's relatively correct. And when you look at the trends, you do see some things. So I'm just going to read you headlines from the exec summary just to frame this. And from this is a 2025 report. And as you may know, the last couple of years had the most elections on the planet in human history. So the unfortunate headline is elections have failed to improve trust. Next headline is globalization, economic and technology fears worsen job insecurity. Unprecedented global decline for employer trust. Next one, low income mired in distrust. There's always been a gap between the wealthy and the less wealthy in terms of how they trust institutions and so on, but it's widened significantly. Fear that leaders lie is at an all-time high. And majority convinced the wealthy take more than their fair share. 4 in 10 respondents see hostile activism as a viable means to drive change. And so that's 4 in 10 overall. When you look at younger demographics, i.e., I think it's the 16 to 34 demo, it's over 50%, it's 53%. So we really have a situation where people are dissatisfied. There's a very high degree of grievance and a very high degree and a growing distrust of institutions. So this clearly needs to be addressed at any level before you, in my feeling, even as a condition precedent to really trying to restore institutional trust overall. And then we now have, of course, the advent of AI. And this has the promise and the potential on 2 sides. One is to concentrate power further in a few hands and to be used in authoritarian ways. And on the other side, to be the most empowering force we've seen in our lifetimes, or maybe ever, in terms of getting information, valid information, into more hands of more people than ever before, and instantly available. And that includes individuals, institutions, etc. And both those things exist at the same time. And I think the moment we find ourselves in is really that moment in this next couple of years, which way that's going to go and which way the cement will dry. I think it's pretty daunting as a challenge because the race is on, and even today we'll see in Washington, the president here is meant to introduce his AI plan. By all indications, he's going to take the reins off, and it will be a plan that has very few regulations. It will be about building as fast as you can and kind of winning the AI race for America globally. So the guidelines are not going to be there, most likely. So what do you do? First of all, and I think, Ismail, you said this, which is you have to pick certain fights, so to speak, certain battles, and you have to have proof points and win some of them. People have to see that there is a way to win these other than the kind of, let's call it, more centralized, more authoritarian ways. There are some technical things we can do around AI in terms of transparency of the algorithms and various things like that. But I think most of all, and this is where I'll conclude, and I think there's an interesting thing to be done here. Most of all, the companies that are leading the technology revolution now need to believe that mass adoption, the greatest business outcome for them, is going to result from the best practices. That the better they operate with more transparency, more validity, and a series of appropriate guidelines, they will benefit from that in their goals, because doesn't appear, at least here in the United States, that it's going to come from government. And if the companies can believe that, which OpenAI, by the way, is the one that says it most. But if they can believe that and compete on that basis, I think we have a chance to have the kinds of tools in hand that, Ismail, you spoke about, that could get people to be more actively informed and actively engaged in the democratic process. So I think a big, kind of to-do is to convince those companies that their best outcome results from best practices. So I'll stop there, and I look forward to talking more about these kinds of issues, but I wanted to lay out at least almost that singular point as a point of inflection that we're coming to. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John. Yes, there's so much to say about all of this. Let me now turn to Denis NAUGHTEN. Please try to limit yourself with 5 minutes.
Thanks, Ismail, and I'll stick to the 5 minutes as best I can. First of all, maybe to introduce myself, I have been a Member of Parliament for 28 years. I've served as a Cabinet Minister in the Irish government. And over the last number of years, I've chaired the Working Group on Science and Technology within the Interparliamentary Union, which is the parliamentary equivalent of the United Nations, where parliaments come together, and we've been focused on trying to feed evidence into policy making and into Parliament. And I suppose I'm going to come from a slightly different perspective in relation to this, and maybe give a couple of practical examples. And I suppose today we're living in a wicked era. We have a situation where countries are turning in on themselves, focusing on the state, and yet we're living in a global society where we've never been more connected before, and where a crisis in one part of the world can very quickly spill over. And we've seen that in terms of the financial crisis in 2008 in the United States. We've seen it in relation to the pandemic emerging out of China in relation to COVID-19. So for me, I think the answer is not to give up on global cooperation, but to try and rethink it. And I think countries that are willing to work together need to push forward, need to, yes, address challenges such as trade, but also the commitments that are there in relation to the Sustainable Development Goals, tackling issues like health, environment, climate, and global security, but leaving the door open for those countries that are not willing to move at this particular point in time. And I think for me, science, with its evidence-based approach, can help facilitate and provide a new way and a new approach, a mechanism for rational decision making that cuts through the populist rhetoric and political gridlock that we see in many parts of the world today. And it's a tool that enables us to focus not on ideological battles, but on real world outcomes. I'll give you 3 examples of that. Drawing on our own history of fostering peace on the island of Ireland through dialogue and problem solving in relation to shared challenges. Ireland has proven a model of transforming divisions within communities into collaboration by peace building through scientific cooperation. And in fact, at the start of this conference on Monday, we had actually one of the architects of the Irish peace process, Bertie Ahern, who addressed the conference. Now, in my experience serving as a cabinet minister in Ireland, serving on the British Irish Council and the North-South Ministerial Council, I've witnessed how science can serve as a non-political platform to foster relationships, even in the most challenging of circumstances. And recall children whose grandparents were trying to murder each other, now working together to protect their local environment. So through collaborative scientific initiatives, we've demonstrated that shared problem solving can help build trust and create solutions that transcend political divides. As I say, I have worked with the Interparliamentary Union in the recent past, and I was co-chair of the Interparliamentary Union Science for Peace Schools that utilise scientific cooperation as a tool for peace building at regional level, transforming shared challenges into opportunities for coexistence through evidence-informed approaches. The Science for Peace School model of dialogue addresses critical issues such as water scarcity in conflict-prone regions like the Middle East and the Sahel region of Africa. And by employing scientific method and fostering cross-sector partnerships, the programme has demonstrated how evidence-informed policy making can mitigate resource-driven tensions, inspire cooperation, and promote equitable solutions. The third example that I just want to give you is in relation to the use of foresight. The reality is that today's global leaders are constantly dealing with urgent problems, which leaves little time to think of long-term risks, be it climate change, future pandemics, or even nuclear threats. These issues are huge, they're interconnected, but they're also slow-moving. But yet the decisions that we make today can shape the future for people and for our planet. The Horizon 2045 Catalyst Forum was created to try and help break that short-term thinking and explore what security will be like in the long-term future. The forum combines science with science fiction and virtual reality in powerful ways to fast forward to the turn of the 22nd century. Together, the participants there explore different future scenarios, both good and bad, and what would actually be the result of today's decisions. And this immersive experience, trying to get a deeper understanding of how today's polycrisis could evolve over time, generated new thinking on areas like health, democracy, nuclear safety, and how we could prevent disaster or unlock innovative solutions. Now, these three different strategies are all built around the foundation of science as a universal truth, which facilitates engagement, neutral engagement. And in an era of profound global challenges, from climate change to resource scarcity to geopolitical fragmentation and armed conflict, science and technology, I believe, can offer a transformative potential for fostering societal progress and global trust. So by bringing decision makers, policy makers, scientists and citizens together under the shared principles of both evidence and neutrality, we can actually envision a future where global challenges are met with innovation, collaboration, but most importantly, with an enduring peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Denis. Let me now turn to Ivana. You have the floor. 5 minutes, please. Give me your best shot.
Hello. Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for this opportunity to participate in the efforts to understand the complexity we're living in and to tackle into the very important question of today's world on how do we rebuild the world where equity and stability and true democracy aren't just ideals but living realities. I've noticed that over the last 3 days, a lot of panelists refer to the UN 2030 agenda. And it's very important to say that this initiative did put the people, the human, in the center of the conversation, the people's dignity and the future. And it actually did shift our perception on what are our real needs and our real threats. In this light, I just want to say that after these 3 days, we will be able to come out with some new transformative initiatives in the near future. So as a panelist coming from Serbia, I want to refer on the concrete situation which is happening currently. So we have the example of the democratically elected government becoming typical example of autocratic and plutocratic regime. So for some of you who do not know, last November, the collapse of the newly renovated rail station killed 16 people, wanting to say that 16 lives lost to corruption and negligence. Protests had spread over 400 cities and towns in Serbia, and people are asking for the accountability for this disaster. So now, what is very special about these protests? Unlike in 2000s, when people were advocating for the regime change and proposing the concrete group of new leaders, these young people now are desperate for the deep social transformation of our society. And what they want is a final break free from the former nationalist regime embodied in the toxic political culture and widespread corruption, repressed democratic freedoms, and media manipulation based on populist logic. So the central question we must confront today, this panel, is how do democracies actually backslide into autocracy and plutocracy even when governments maintain the facade of elections? Well, the truth is that newly formed democracies often lack critical foundations such as culture of democracy and civic knowledge about how democratic systems should function and institutional memory to sustain them. So in concrete case of Serbia, just in my lifetime, as many of you know, we went from one-party communist regime of Yugoslavia to the explosion of nationalism and civil war, then to transitional period mixing democratic aspirations and with wartime trauma to the final catastrophic fusion of organized crime and state structures. We are a captured state where middle-class opportunity is systematically strangled. So what is important to carry out from this meeting, I would say, is that no democracies fight alone, and countries like Serbia really need mentorship that can help them to establish positive democratic culture and strengthen democratic institutions. These vital objectives can only be realized throughout sustained global solidarity among democracies. We must build robust alliances capable of knowledge transfer and system reinforcement and cultural exchange. So this is not about intervention, it's about interdemocratic cooperation. And when democracies stand together, sharing both wisdom and knowledge and warning signs, we actually create an ecosystem where authoritarian backsliding becomes much more difficult to execute or conceal. So yeah, these are my points, and yeah, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, you're muted, Ismail.
Thank you very much for this comment. I would also like to point out that Serbia is one of the few countries which insisted, as it cleansed itself of its past, to ensure accountability. If I'm not mistaken, President Boris Tadic arranged for Mr. Milosevic and colleagues to be held accountable in The Hague. Unfortunately, that is not happening today. Supposedly, major powers, for example, are protecting people who are behaving miserably, whether it's in Ukraine or in Gaza or in other places as well. Let me stop that and move on to Piero. Maybe you would have the next few minutes, up to 5 minutes. Piero, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me in this very interesting panel. I think that also after listening to my colleague and the other panelists, that the problems and issues we are facing are all interdependent and influence each other. They concern different levels of analysis. You can think on micro and macro. which, unlike in the past, we can no longer keep separate. And as I've been saying for many, many years, many of the problems that we talk about, the possibility of managing complexity, or understanding, inhabiting complexity, are closely related to the confusion we continue to perpetuate, especially in our beloved and educational and training institution, between complicated systems that are mechanisms and complex systems that are organisms, as you know. So I apologize for the extreme brevity, and I will try to outline some critical points. The first is that the paradigmatic challenge of the hypercomplex society as the problem of democracy are primarily epistemological and educational. Regards our way of thinking, our way of renew and define and develop knowledge and the methods to achieve knowledge. So they force us to rethink how we think and to adopt a non-disjunctive system of thought. They push us to go beyond what I've called the false dichotomies, developing an awareness of the unpredictability and irreversibility of phenomena, the confusion among complex and complicated systems. So we now have discovered the emerging systemic and relational dimension of humanity and life. We are continuing to be educated to as we are living in a world of objects, but we are living in a world of systems. That is one of the some of fundamental epistemological challenge. And on this kind of separation, we co-construct the overall architectures of knowledge and skills that are based on traditional, as you know, logics of power, of separation, confinement of knowledge and skills. For example, when you talk about the urgency of a culture of sustainability, that is, in my opinion, is a culture of complexity, we have the enormous problem of the architecture of our educational and training institutions that are based on monodisciplinaries, that are based on this kind of logic of separation and confinement. Another ideas that I like to suggest and share with you is that the majority of our problems are based on what I like to call the ideology of simplification and facilitation. That is deeply related to the so-called revolution, digital revolution, so-called digital revolution. I'd like to clarify, is a sort of my mantra, that the opposite of complexity is not simplification. The opposite of complexity is the reductionism, the reductionistic approach to the complexity. But as you know very well, simplification is a value, but it's not an absolute value. And we need to be aware that everything is not simplifiable. And so we are dealing with the risk today, with the idea, with the ideology that it's possible to simplify also democracies, eliminating the processes of negotiation, reducing democracy itself to a mere sequence of norms and procedures. Worst of all, it completely does away with the alternative thinking and protest, while producing an illusion of an equal and direct relationship to power, for instance, through some kind of online platform. And I have to conclude, I think that we need also to clarify, to be aware about the importance of thinking to the long term, long period. We have the risk that this is another of the talk of the town, but we think to try also to rethink the transnational organization, which, as demonstrated by the dramatic wars and in particular the situation in Gaza, are no longer effective in their decisions and actions. I think that we can we have to think, we must think to try to construct a culture of complexity and a culture of sustainability that go beyond traditional separation and logic of separation. Thanks.
Could I make one comment on what Piero just said?
Well, okay, I was going to come back after David, but if you want to go ahead,
Oh,
go
I'm
ahead
sorry.
right now.
I'll do it very quickly because it's just an agreement. Piero talked about the digital world leading to simplification and reductionism, which I certainly agree with. It also, in the same vein, leads to the ability to create emotional and wedge issues in that process that become very politicized and used, as we've probably all seen around the world recently. So I think all of that goes together. And sorry to jump in.
No, indeed. Well, thank you, Piero. Thank you, John. Let me now move to my dear friend, David, who is now coming wearing a new hat. He and I go back a long way. David, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ismail. It's wonderful to be in this group and under your management and leadership. And thank you for accepting me as a rescapé from a panel yesterday. I couldn't do that. And also, it's you mentioned hats. I answer people that when I worked in the UN, I had one business card, and it was enough. Now I have 4 or 5, and hats, but none of them bring home the bacon. So, but let me. I just want to focus on 2-3 things very briefly. The reason for that is we live in a change of eras. We're bereft of policies, bereft of principles, and no waypoints are operating. So we are in uncharted waters to a great extent. And since we are in this change of eras, we need to very carefully, I think about the terminology that we take for granted and we use. And without any pretense of being some sort of a coiner-in-chief of any definitions, but just to put out my concerns that even the terms, and I want to specifically talk about democracy, that we're talking about, and multilateralism. Democracy, I think, we take for granted the democracy that we understand under the organized West European and North Atlantic democracies. None of them are perfect, yet they are unquestionably presented for all the others who are left outside the stockade to either subscribe to or take the highway. And that, I think, is not an approach which we can really entertain in this era. It may have been possible in another era. But in this change, the other thing is, I don't want to sound like Amr Musa, but double standards exist, and they are coming back with a vengeance, and cynicism is there, and to a great extent we see even very unfortunate cases of democracy being weaponized. You can see it in international fora. You can see it in particular ways that clubs of the Illuminati have understood that they have to talk to the unwashed masses. And so that does not breed good vibes nor a good basis to proceed. I don't want to continue pontificating on this. I'm very conscious of the time. I want to talk about multilateralism just a little bit. Multilateralism is not an organization. Multilateralism is a concept. Multilateralism, first and foremost, is a mindset, and it is a willingness to do things in a particular way. It is not an organization. An organization is created because there is a multilateral mindset. the organization did not create multilateralism, and it cannot uphold multilateralism on its own. Member states create organizations in a mode when they are thinking of multilateralism. What is happening now is they are not thinking in a multilateral mindset. They are thinking in a very pronounced national egotistic manner. I heard a few years back this mantra that, the Westphalian system is going to the trash bin of history, and now everything is civil society and so on. Well, the Westphalian system has come back with a vengeance, and it is better than ever. And so what we need to bear in mind is that international organizations can only do maintenance reform, which they do regularly. But the kind of reform that is required today has to be done by those who created these organizations. They have to step up. The United Nations Secretary General shouldn't be coming up with UNOG and presenting proposals to send posts from Vienna to Nairobi or to some other place. That is not reform. And what the member states have been saying for the last 20 years, 30 years actually, is it's not reform. They've been basically cutting budgets. That's and passing it off as reform. So very importantly, media, as mentioned here, I'm not going to go into that, but media has absolutely changed its colors, its feathers, and has been supplanted by social media. And that is a major problem. And AI, no guidelines, AI is a big, big danger. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much. I hope I didn't go too much over.
No, thank you, David. I'd just like to pick up on all the things that you said, all of you, and pose to you a technical challenge, if I may say so. Two things happened which deserve perhaps a little bit of a reflection. I believe that at the time of Boutros-Ghali, the Secretary General of the United Nations undertook a series of summits, starting with Rio Summit and then going on to the Social Summit and the Beijing Summit and the Population Summit, and then the Food Security Summit in Rome, and finally the Cities Summit in Istanbul. Now, what was very important about those 6 summits and other activities that took place beyond that was that for the first time, civil society, business, as well as the official delegations were present. I believe that that helped create a consensus about a series of issues dealing with developmental challenges that enabled the miracle of the millennium, which under Kofi Annan, as you remember, all the countries unanimously agreed on the Millennium Development Goals to guide action from 20 to 2015. And that was reasserted by another Secretary General at the time, that we had the Paris Accord of 2015, the new SDGs 2015, the SDI Framework 2015, again, a unanimous action that took place. We seem to have lost the consensus that enabled that enthusiasm to break out everywhere. And 2 last points I will make. One, you mentioned the Westphalian model. I think the problem with that is that people think it created the nation state. It didn't. It created the sovereign state. Nations can be the Arab nations, 22 sovereign nations, or it can be the German nation, etc., where culture plays a role. But then, having created that, they started thinking in terms of national identity. So we have a flag and the anthem and the common narrative for history, etc., and ethnic minorities became a problem suddenly, all of a sudden everywhere. And that again created room for these wedge issues to come up. So can we find a way in which we can think again of how to bring that consensus building approach, which was done through these series of actions, to bring the civil society on a broad set of issues, as well as business, as well as the new technologies and science, as well as the delegations. Would anybody like to take that up? We have one more round. I'm going to give each of you 2.5 minutes at most because we are running out of time to make any last-minute comments. John, you want to start?
Oh, well, thank you. And to try to grapple with your very truly profound question, I think it goes back to actually something you said at the top, is you have to figure out where you can pick your battles, as the expression goes, so that you can get some momentum and as they say, get some wins behind you to build from there. Because the self-interest or the apparent self-interest of many countries now seems to take precedent versus the multilateralism. Whereas I think most of us probably feel that the larger issues transcend any particular country and can only be solved in a concerted effort across those lines. But where do you start? So I think it's really figuring out two things from my point of view. One is, what are those starting places through what institutions that still have viability? And then, as I said in kind of my remarks, how do you bring a population along for that ride and to understand those initiatives, given the state of media, the state of social media, and so on? How do you penetrate that in a way that people can understand it and latch on to it? Because one of the other things that came out in the survey is when trust increases, just the measurement of trust, and it also affects economic outlook. It affects overall happiness. There's a whole series of cascading positives that happen when you can get there. So I think it's a combination of, one, the institutions, and two, the penetration in the consciousness of really populations at scale.
Thank you. Denis?
Yeah, just to pick up on where John has left off there, I agree with him. I think it's about picking the battles, but I think it's about looking at the win-win situations that meet the self-interest needs of many countries, but also require a multilateral approach to try and address them. And I come back to my earlier comments. I think that science can help to whittle down some of these battles and identify where the commonality is that you can actually build the foundation of engagement. And I think there is a challenge in bringing the populations along. We've seen in terms of many of these summits, yes, they involve civil society, yes, they involve business, but the difficulty now is actually delivering and implementing them. And I think we need to look at some other models for engagement with a far broader catchment of the population than is being represented by the business community or by the selected civil society organizations. And a very good example is the Pact for the Mediterranean that is being led by the Mediterranean countries, both north and south of the Mediterranean, and funded by the European Union, where they have developed this model of conversation circles, where they've engaged with over 1,000 people around the Mediterranean from every aspect of society and life, so that the outcome document that comes out of that is far more representative of the communities that will potentially benefit from it than would have been the case in terms of historic models of negotiation. So I think we do need to look at new models of engagement, new ways to feed innovative solutions into the process. And I think the building blocks of that is based on evidence and innovation.
Thank you. Ivana?
I'll get back to something you mentioned, Ismail, which is like civic action of grassroots. So in Serbia, we have the situation where people are really living for the system working, institution accountability, and all the positive democratic values. But the problem is, once again, as I said, the lack of institution knowledge and memory to sustain these ideas. So I think that this can only be built throughout like higher integration of Serbia into the democratic alliances, because this flipping and flopping is kind of making a constant from left to right, from this and that. It's just not allowing sustained progress into the healthy, accountable functioning of the system. So that's at this point, because considering that how like over the 100,000 people are on the streets, it's probably just that we actually need systemic, like system solutions. We need know-how. So that's what's my point on this.
Thank you. Piero?
Oh, thank you. To record the significant title of the panel, I think that we will never be able to return to multilateralism and to the idea and vision that democracy is complexity, as long as we continue to educate and train ourselves in linear thinking, that I like to call disjunctive thinking. The solution of the problem is in the possibility of separating the parts that constitute the system. As long as we do not radically change schools and universities that continue to educate and train in rationality and total control, and in the view that everything is predictable. Complicated systems are manageable, predictable, measurable. Complex systems are characterized, as you know, from, for example, by the emergent properties that are not observable. The emergent properties of complex systems are observable only during the non-linear evolution of the complex system. And the fundamental and strategic rule of schools and university are related, as you know very well, that you can think that our politicians, our ruling class, came out from out of schools and university, and also about the issue, the fundamental issue of fake news, misinformation, disinformation. I think that the real problems is that we are facing today are not the fake news that, okay, is a fundamental problem, post-truth, deep fakes, or disinformation. I think that the real problem is a sort of socially constructed, co-constructed predisposition to conformism. And I think that this kind of predisposition to conformism is the decline of democracy. So reality, in a sort of slogan, reality has changed radically, but knowledge and paradigms have not. So we are currently dominated by new forms of complexity, reduction, some of which are dangerous. You can think, for example, technocracy versus democracy, or the idea that education is a sort of problem, only technical problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. David?
Yes, I see we're practically out of time, so maybe a little injury time. Let me just clarify one thing. Multilateralism is not dead. Multilateralism is alive and well, but in small groups. In such an organization, for example, as BRICS, it's a booming business. The EU, ASEAN, it exists. What is in trouble is universal multilateralism. And I'm grateful to you, Ismail, for mentioning Dr. Boutros Ghali, because I believe firmly, and I've been saying this, that we're talking about the wrong date, the wrong anniversary. Chronologically 80 years old. But this UN, this multilateralism, these sets of problems are 33 years old, because there is a new time where the counter started, and that was 1992. And there was a new multilateralism, a new system, and the collective West absolutely miserably failed to take advantage of it. And not giving Dr. Boutros Ghali a second term was the crowning last adding of insult to injury, because that showed that there is no room for multilateralism, and we are reaping and just last word, these heads of state and government come together every September in New York in larger and larger numbers, and they make very, very interesting and highfalutin speeches. They even adopt things like they did in 2015, the SDGs, for example, and the financing for the development. But none of them have any inclination to then act on what they have adopted or what they spoke about from the rostrum. That is where the problem is. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Let me just wrap up with perhaps two observations. Observation number one is that we have, in my judgment, the most incredible success story, which we have taken totally for granted, and that is the European Union. Not only is it highly prosperous, etc., but more importantly, I have seen in one generation, young Germans and young Frenchmen come to a point where they cannot imagine their countries going to war, when their parents and their grandparents couldn't ever imagine that there would be peace between France and Germany after the War of 1870, the War of 1914, the War of 1939. Yet, in the 1960s and so on, I saw a young generation of both countries totally immersed in this project. Secondly, that project also gave us an interesting notion, which I think picks up on what was said about whether it's ASEAN or other combinations, or some of you mentioned cooperating countries of the willing. It is the idea of variable geometry, that you don't have to be a member of the Euro and of Schengen and all of these at the same time to be a member of the EU, that you can have subsets of that or overlays that include other people like EFTA and other things. In the same way, I think we can think of a multilateralism that can be born between cooperation of various countries. My last word is going to be a little bit not good, but nevertheless, I can't leave without saying it. It is, to me, unbelievable that we witness every day on the news what is happening in Gaza, and that all the humanitarians, unanimously, all the UN agencies, unanimously, all the doctors, unanimously say the same things, that this is what is happening, this is what is happening, this is what is happening, and yet we do not have the capacity to agree on getting a stop on that any more than we have had the capacity to rein in Russia and Ukraine or other battles elsewhere. But that one is particularly visible because all of the UN agencies, all the humanitarians are in accord of what we are witnessing, people dying of hunger, people being shot, etc., etc. So the norms, or shall we say, the acceptance of violence in everyday life, in wars going on everywhere, remote areas, is a challenge. But I believe in the great words of Abraham Lincoln, let us speak to the better angels of our nature, and we will ultimately all come out better. Thank you each and every one, and thank the organizers, WAAS, for giving us this chance to explore these two fundamental topics, whether the slippage from democracy or the need for a new multilateralism. I hope that this conversation has helped us identify some new areas where we may act. And I would like to take this chance to thank each and every one of the panelists for their contributions and the precision with which you made your statements. Thank you each and every one. And
thank you.
We now return to the organizers.
Thank you very much, Ismail, for your
Thank you very much, Ismail. Thanks all.